As I have been doing in each of these sessions, I'm just picking out some things, not attempting, as I said before, to give a comprehensive explanation of this work. Rather, in a sense, I'm doing what John himself is doing in his commentary, just alerting to various things, drawing attention to some. Because that's what John himself is doing in his commentary, as we're dealing with material that is impossible to explain, enter into the depths of. So this morning we're picking out really two aspects from the third stanza. And John begins his commentary on the third stanza by saying something he's already said, that if people haven't got experience, they could misinterpret this or think it's very obscure or not what it's meant to be or less than what it is. So he prays for God's help to help him explain something of the meaning of this stanza. But we find that everywhere, because what he is doing in each of these stanzas, he's taking us in deeply into some aspects of the flame. As I said, to be it's not a progression, but rather like dip in here, dip in here, dip in here, and sense something of the depths and the riches of what is going on in this union of love between the Father, Son and Spirit, and the soul in which they inhabit, which they live, and the soul which they bring to life. And here in this third stanza, we see something of this bringing to life, particularly in the image of the lamps. John uses this image of the lamps to try and convey something of the life that the presence and power and love of God gives to the person. Or maybe put differently, how this light is experienced. But first of all, he tells us that in this union, it, the soul, the person, receives abundant and lofty knowledge of God. That is the fundamental. The person is receiving abundant and lofty knowledge of God. The difficulty that we have as people within the limits of our humanity and of our world and of our experience is that abundant and lofty knowledge of God always seems to be obscure, beyond us. We will misinterpret it. We will put our own interpretation, our own meanings onto it. We will miss it completely, or see it to be the complete opposite of what it actually is. And so, the two images that I'm picking out here are ways in which John brings us into something of the experience of this abundant and lofty knowledge that God is giving. Because God is giving this. And we might say the principle behind this, John is everything is told, everything is communicated here around the principles of love, how love operates. As John tells us elsewhere, love is God's language. God is always speaking the language of love. And in order to hear God, we've got to listen in the language of love. And so the principle here, we might say from the language of love that we've got is this. True lovers are only content when they employ all they are in themselves, all they are worth, have, and receive in the beloved. And the greater all this is, the more satisfaction they receive in giving it. So that's a principle of love. Love at every level. True lovers, when love is truthful, when there's true love, it's the only content. They're not content with anything else. Only content. When they employ all that they are in themselves. Their worth, all that they have, all that they receive in the beloved. Their whole being. Everything they have, everything they receive, everything they're worth, everything is employed in the beloved. And the greater that this is, the more satisfaction they receive in giving. And so here we have this principle, we might say, pushed to its very limits. The very limits possible in human experience. And limits that take one to the very edge, that place which is, in a sense, almost touching eternal life. When the human being is set free from the restraints and limitations of human life and can actually enter fully into this. But here, John is trying to convey something of what this is when it is pushed to the limits possible in human experience. And it can only be brought to this place in relationship with God. Human relationships between lovers, will always aspire towards this, yes. And in very good relationships will go a lot of the way towards it. But the relationship with God is bigger than this. Because one is receiving a love that is beyond the human limitations. And therefore it will bring out in the person greater depths and more abundant generosity. But that also affects every other relationship. Because when the capacity for love increases, that capacity for love is seen in every place, everywhere this person gives love. And here we come to the lamps. John always has wonderful images. These are lamps, they're light that's given out from the flame. They're like other flames that the flame will light up. And John tells us that these lamps have two properties. They transmit light and they give off warmth, heat, light and heat. And so, to understand the lamps, John has to tell us something of the nature of God. And what John calls the attributes of God, that's a phrase that comes from philosophy and theology that John would have learned at university, and these attributes of God. The philosophers speak about the attributes of God. And there, John just gives a few examples here, but there are many examples we could pick out. God is all wise, good, He's merciful, just, powerful, loving. And as John said here, and other infinite attributes and powers that we've no knowledge of. And God is all of these, and the fullness of all of these. But we experience them, in a sense, individually, like wisdom, or power, or justice, or love, or we will experience these. But when we experience them, we're experiencing something of God. Because these are attributes of God. And so when these lamps are lit up in a person, then the person is giving forth something of God. Each of these attributes, John tells us here, is a lamp that enlightens the soul and gives off the warmth of love. So the person receives light, wisdom, insight, knowledge, what it's receiving from that, and it is giving off warmth, love, affection, what it is communicating. And this comes from God. So this is God communicating Himself, His very being, and the person communicating this. And so, there's so many examples of this. God is, just to give one example here from what John tells, He is to the soul a lamp of justice, fortitude and mercy, and all the other attributes are represented to it together in God. The light communicated from all these attributes together is enveloped in the warmth of love of God, by which it loves Him, because He is all these things. In this communication and manifestation of Himself to the soul, which in my opinion is the greatest possible in this life, He is to it innumerable lamps, giving forth knowledge and love of Himself. So the person is receiving knowledge and love of God, and is giving that out in these attributes. Because the person is now united with God, who is the fullness of all of these. It's this principle of love that all the being, all that the lover has, is, possesses, is given to the beloved. And so if a person who is receiving within them the fullness of this love that God has, then they're going to be giving that. That's the would be giving that out. And so God is experienced. To come back to what I said at the beginning, that the difficulty here is that we can't, because of our limited humanity, our limited we can't have direct access to God. But what we have are these attributes. But they are, when justice and love and wisdom and all of these coming from the person, they are coming from the presence of God within. And the person will be living and acting out of that presence. And so he goes on to express this in all kinds of ways. Okay, that's how this is given out in the other image, and the principal image of this stanza is the caverns. These vast, empty caverns within. This is how it's experienced by a person. With this image of the caverns and these infinite caverns, John is trying to convey the infinite capacity a person has for God. The caverns are the human capacity for God. The capacity for a relationship with God. How can the infinite dwell in someone so finite and limited as a human being? What has been going on all the time in this work as is that on the one hand we have infinite God, the all-powerful, all-merciful, all-loving God, united with the limited human being. Limited in himself, limited in his capacity, limited in experience, with all the limitations that go with being human. But the God that is in relationship with the soul here cannot be limited. And therefore must have the capacity to relate with this God. And hence this journey or this process of growing, healing, maturing, purification that's going on. That is needed to increase the capacity for God. And that's the image of these caverns, these vast empty caverns that have to be emptied. So the more empty a person feels within, the closer they are to God. It's this principle, I suppose, that when a person feels close to God, they're not. Because whatever they're feeling close to, it's not God. Because a person cannot feel God or feel closeness to God. But whenever a person is touched by some experience of God, God will seem further away. Just further away from God the person will feel. Because they'll be getting some sense of the vastness of God and the limits of myself. And the more God communicates himself, the greater the distance seems to the person. And now here in these caverns we have that pushed to its limits. Person feeling totally empty within. But yet not filled with God. The way he puts it here for us, when these caverns are empty and pure, the thirst, hunger and yearning of the spiritual feeling is intolerable. Since these caverns have deep stomachs, they suffer profoundly. For the food they lack, which I say is God, is also profound. So these caverns have to be emptied, purged, cleansed, he tells us, of every affection for creatures. They do not feel the vast emptiness of their capacity until this happens. Any little thing that sticks to them in this life is sufficient to so burden and bewitch them that they do not perceive the harm or note the lack of the immense goods and know their own capacity. So when a person is attached to something or limited in some way, they don't see their lack. So what the light is doing is it is showing the person what they're lacking. And that's how we as human beings experience. We're shown what we're lacking. And the capacity that needs to expand here. And this is the heart of this third stanza. This, what John calls a spiritual appetite, is emptied and purged of every creature and affection for creatures. And so, since it has lost its natural quality and is adapted to the divine, and since its void is disposed and the divine is not communicated with in union with God, the pain of this void and the thirst are worse than death. Especially when a divine ray appears vaguely, as though through some crevices. That's when it's because some divine ray has appeared somewhere. Because what is being whetted is the appetite for God, which nothing else will satisfy. Whatever might have satisfied a person before is now seen as being nothing, of no value. Such is the person's longing for God. So God becomes more absent, more distant, more incomprehensible. And what satisfied before this just won't anymore. And so what about people who are living this? John, here in his commentary on this stanza, we've no time to go into it, Right? I just want to notice these people need careful guidance. He goes into a long parenthesis about spiritual directors. People will come along and will tell people like this, oh, you're not doing it right, you should be doing this, you should be doing that, you should be reading this, you should be... And of course, none of this is going to help. It's going to make matters worse. He speaks about 3 blind guides. And the 3 blind guides are the spiritual director, the person themselves, or the devil. But most of it is the spiritual director, others. And by that it could be anyone else giving any kind of... Because none of... Oh, you should be doing this, you should be reading, I should be... Not going to help. It's going to... What these people need, John tells us, there's only 2 things. Encouragement and freedom. Just encourage these people. Just encourage. That's all needs encouragement. And the freedom to go with this. Just wherever the Lord is taking them, just go with it. Just stay with this emptiness. It's okay. This whole section here is, in a sense, praising these cavities, this emptiness, because it is the capacity for God. Only God will satisfy. The capacity of these caverns is deep, because the object of this capacity, namely God, is profound and infinite. Thus, in a certain fashion, their capacity is infinite. Their thirst is infinite. Their hunger is also deep and infinite. And their languishing and suffering are infinite death. That's what it can feel like at times. That's what, and the closer one gets to God, the more that's going to be. Because that's the principle of love, or any experience of love. When a person has been touched by their lover, nothing else, nothing less than that is going to satisfy. And so these people who have been touched by these lamps, something of the light, something of the warmth of these lamps, everything else is as nothing. Only God. So here in this stanza, with this imagery of the lamps and the caverns, John is trying to convey with these 2 images the experience of God and what that means to a human being. The person who has somehow experienced God will be living and acting from that experience, from the light and warmth of that experience. And that will be seen in these attributes, like justice, love, wisdom, etc. You can make your own list of all the attributes of God, all that are virtues proper to God. The self-giving love that is there. Taken to their and the more that is there, the more radical that is. The more of God is, because all of these are communicating something of God. But at the same time, these people can be feeling and will be feeling profoundly empty within. And the stronger and greater the experience of God is, the more empty the people are within. So you'll have this person who will be doing great work, wonderful work of charity, and everybody will be turning to this person for advice and for help, and this person will be showing so many of these attributes, and others will be, yet the person themselves will be feeling more and more empty within. They cannot stop doing what they're doing, nor they wouldn't want to, nor would not change anything. What is happening is that they're living more and more by the light of these lamps. And what God is doing within them is expanding and expanding this capacity for Him within the person. And that will mean purifying, cleansing, healing, transforming, and detaching from so many other things that maybe in the past interested or satisfied them now. Not that they won't be interested or satisfied in them as they, but they will no longer be satisfied, because the person can be satisfied with nothing less than God. That's the nature of love. When love enters in, everything else is in second or third or fifth or 100th place. When love has come in. When somebody falls in love, all their attention is on the person they've fallen in. Other things which might have been terribly important even yesterday somehow are way back in the priority list. When it is with God, then even more so. But they can still do all the other things, and do them far better, because it's being done now with and in and through the love of God within, which is not limited by human limitations. So the emptier the person here is, the more free they are to love. But not confined or restricted by the feelings of love or the affirmation that comes from love or the results that they might think their love should be producing. They're free of all that. Therefore, the love will be more complete, more self-giving, more free. Okay, maybe that's enough about these lamps and these caverns. Read the rest of it. Okay, so we come back at 11 and I'll alert you to one or two things from the 4th stanza.